Before we begin, I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Picture a cold winter morning in the mountains of West Virginia. The wind howls through bare trees, snow crunches underfoot. And somewhere in a small wooden house, a terrible secret is about to surface. Now, imagine this. What would you do if the only witness to a murder was already dead? What if a grieving mother walked into court, stood before the judge, and swore, under oath, that her daughter's ghost, yes, ghost, had told her the name of her killer? And what if the court actually listened? This is no campfire tale. It's no script from a horror movie. This is a case recorded in American legal history. The year is 1897. In the misty hills of Greenbrier County, West Virginia, a young woman named Elva Zona Heaster Shue is found lying at the bottom of a narrow staircase. Her husband says it was an accident. The local doctor calls it natural causes. And just like that, her body is placed in the ground. But her mother, Jane Heaster, knows better. Something deep inside tells her the truth has been buried along with her daughter. 4 nights after the funeral, Zona comes back, pale, cold, and twisted. Not to haunt her mother in terror, but to deliver a message. And what follows is one of the strangest murder cases in America, the only documented case where the testimony of a ghost helped convict a killer. This is the true story of the Greenbrier Ghost. The story begins in Greenbrier County, a remote, rugged corner of West Virginia, nestled deep within the folds of the Appalachian Mountains. It is the final years of the 19th century, a time when the roads are nothing more than dirt tracks carved through the hills. In winter, the ground freezes solid. In spring, it turns to rivers of mud. Houses are small, built of wood, heated by potbelly stoves, their chimneys breathing thin streams of smoke into the cold air. Life here moves at the pace of the seasons. Men work the fields, the mills, or the blacksmith's forge. Women keep the home, tend the gardens, and care for the children. On Sundays, families gather at small clapboard churches, their hymns echoing down the valleys. And when night falls, before the age of electric light, the world slips into darkness. Only the glow of an oil lamp and the distant call of an owl keep you company. In such a place, old beliefs endure. Stories of restless spirits and omens are not dismissed with a laugh. They are passed down, generation to generation, alongside recipes, prayers, and family history. A strange dream, a sudden chill, the sound of footsteps in an empty room. These are not ignored. They are interpreted, respected, feared. It was in this world that a young woman named Elva Zona Heaster lived. Born in 1873, Zona, as everyone called her, was in her early 20s, quiet, polite, and known for her dark hair and thoughtful eyes. She was the kind of young woman neighbors would greet warmly at the general store, but who kept much of her inner life to herself. Her mother, Jane Heaster, was a pillar of strength in the community. A devout Christian, protective, and unafraid to speak her mind, Jane had raised Zona to be respectful, but also to trust her instincts, and Jane's instincts were rarely wrong. In the fall of 1896, change came to Greenbrier. A stranger arrived, a man named Edward Stribling Trout Shue. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the easy charm of someone who knows how to win people over. A skilled blacksmith, he quickly found work at the local shop. But no one knew much about him. He said little about where he had come from, and even less about his past. Zona met him by chance, perhaps in town, perhaps through friends. Whatever the circumstance, their courtship was swift. Within weeks they were seen walking together, and by October they were married. Some in the town raised eyebrows at the speed of it. It was not unheard of for couples to marry quickly, but something about Shue's easy smile and guarded eyes left questions unasked but not unfelt. Jane Heaster in particular was uneasy. She voiced her concern in private, telling friends she didn't like the look of him. But Zona seemed happy, and so the matter rested, at least for a time. The newlyweds moved into a small rented house near Livesey's mill. Life appeared ordinary. There were chores to do, meals to cook, and the quiet rhythm of rural life to keep them occupied. But 3 months later, on the morning of January 23rd, 1897, that rhythm was shattered. A neighbor boy, just 11 years old, was sent by Trout Shue to the house on an errand. When he stepped inside, the house was cold, and there, at the bottom of a narrow staircase, lay Zona's body. She was stretched out on the floor, legs together, one arm at her side, the other across her stomach. Her head was tilted at an odd angle. Her eyes, wide open, seemed to be staring straight at him. The boy ran for help. Dr. George Knapp arrived soon after, but the scene was already being managed by Trout Shue himself. Shue cradled Zona's head in his lap, wailing in grief, refusing to let the doctor examine her closely. Knapp could see no obvious wounds and, perhaps eager to be done with such a tense scene, declared the cause of death to be everlasting faint, an old-fashioned term for sudden, unexplained collapse. Within a day, Zona was in the ground. No autopsy, no investigation, no questions asked. But back at her home, Mary Jane Heaster sat in her rocking chair, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the empty road. She was waiting. Not for a visitor, not for a letter. She was waiting for the truth. Because deep down, she knew her daughter had not died by accident. What happened next has been whispered about for more than a century. It is not just another ghost story told by firelight. It is one of the most chilling and most persistent accounts in American legal history. After the hurried burial of her daughter, Mary Jane Heaster found no peace. She moved through her small home like a shadow, doing her chores with mechanical motions. At night, she would sit beside the cold stove, staring into the darkness, her Bible open but unread. The official story made no sense to her. Zona had been young, healthy, and newly married. No warning signs, no lingering illness, no reason to simply collapse and die. Mary Jane prayed, but these were not prayers for comfort. She did not seek to soothe her grief. She prayed for the truth, for a sign, for an answer, even if it came from the other side. And if her own words are to be believed, her prayers were answered. It began as dreams. Soft, flickering fragments of Zona's face, a sense of her presence, the faint smell of her hair, the way she used to stand in the doorway with her hands folded. But then the dreams became more vivid, more insistent. One night, Mary Jane awoke to a cold draft sliding across her skin. At the foot of her bed, in the pale glow of moonlight through the window, stood her daughter. Zona's face was pale, her eyes wide with a sorrow that pierced the heart. She wore the very dress she had been buried in, a high-collared gown, the fabric wrinkled and earth-stained. But Mary Jane's gaze was drawn to her neck. It was twisted, bent at an unnatural angle, as though the bones had been broken. Mary Jane could not speak. The figure whispered, her voice both familiar and hollow, like words carried on a wind from far away. She told her mother that her husband, Trout Shue, had killed her in a fit of rage. His anger, she said, had flared because she had not cooked meat for supper. He had gripped her throat and snapped her neck between the first and second vertebrae. On the second night, she came again. This time her movements were slower, heavier, as though the telling of the truth cost her strength. She repeated the accusation. She described the pain, the shock, the darkness that followed. On the third night, Zona's ghost appeared more urgently, warning her mother that the truth must be spoken before it was too late. On the fourth and final night, she showed Mary Jane exactly what had been done. She turned her head, slowly, impossibly, until her face was reversed, her eyes still locked on her mother's. Then she was gone. Mary Jane awoke gasping, her nightdress damp with sweat, her hands gripping the blanket. But her fear had turned to a fierce resolve. She told her neighbors, she told the local preacher, and then she went to John Alfred Preston, the county prosecutor. Preston was a man of reason, not superstition, but Mary Jane's calm, precise account gave him pause. She did not ramble. She did not contradict herself. She spoke with the clarity of someone who had seen and heard exactly what she described. Preston began asking questions. He learned that Dr. Knapp had never fully examined Zona's body and that Trout Shue had refused to allow it. He heard whispers that Zona's neck had been concealed beneath a stiff collar and a scarf at the funeral, that her burial had been rushed. It was enough to take action. On a cold February morning, under a pale winter sky, Zona's coffin was raised from the frozen earth. In a small one-room schoolhouse, a jury of local men stood by as 3 doctors examined her remains. The verdict was grim. Her neck had been broken between the first and second vertebrae. Her windpipe was crushed. Bruises in the shape of fingers stained the flesh of her throat. It was exactly as the ghost had said. Word spread like wildfire. What had begun as a grieving mother's tale was now the talk of the county, and soon the state. Whispers became headlines, and a haunting had become a matter of public record. It would be easy, perhaps even comforting, to file the Greenbrier Ghost away under local legend. A strange tale, wrapped in superstition, passed from one storyteller to the next. But the truth is more complicated, because unlike so many ghost stories, this one sits squarely inside the pages of legal history. Let us start with the facts. On February 22nd, 1897, just 1 month after Zona's death, her body was exhumed. The ground was still hard from winter frost. Neighbors gathered quietly at the edge of the cemetery, their breath clouding in the cold air, watching as the coffin was lifted from the earth. The autopsy was held in a nearby one-room schoolhouse. 3 doctors performed the examination, while a jury of local men stood witness. The atmosphere was heavy, the air smelling faintly of wood smoke and damp soil carried in on boots. When they examined her neck, there was no doubt. The bones between the first and second cervical vertebrae had been violently dislocated. Her windpipe was crushed, ligaments were torn, and around her throat, dark marks, shaped unmistakably like the grip of human fingers. One report from the time, now lost but described in later accounts, stated the damage would have caused instant death. No illness, no accident. This was murder. Attention turned to her husband, Edward Stribling Trout Shue. Until then, he had remained polite but distant, keeping mostly to himself. Now, as rumors swirled, his past began to surface. He had been married twice before. His first wife divorced him, citing extreme cruelty. His second wife had died suddenly, under what he described as accidental circumstances. And now his third wife lay in the ground just 3 months after their wedding. Witnesses recalled odd remarks he had made, telling friends that he intended to marry 7 women before he died. Zona was number 3. In June 1897, Trout Shue stood trial for first-degree murder in the Greenbrier County courthouse. The trial drew crowds from across the region, men in work coats, women in dark dresses and bonnets, all crammed into the wooden benches. The murmur of conversation filled the room until the judge's gavel called for silence. The prosecution leaned heavily on the medical evidence, the suspicious behavior at the funeral, and the history of abuse. But the most extraordinary moment came not from them, but from the defense. In what was perhaps a desperate gamble, Shue's lawyer called Mary Jane Heaster to the stand. They believed that if she spoke of the ghost in court, she would make herself look foolish, undermining her credibility. But Mary Jane did not falter. She sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap, and described, calmly, methodically, 4 nights of visitations from her daughter's spirit. She told the court exactly what Zona had said. She even described the vertebrae in the neck, the way it had been broken. The defense expected laughter, perhaps scorn. Instead, the courtroom was silent. The judge, bound by law, instructed the jury to disregard any testimony that could not be proven. But the words had been spoken. They were on the record. And that is what makes State of West Virginia versus Edward St. Shue unique in American history. It remains the only documented case in which a ghost's testimony, relayed through a living witness, was admitted under oath in a murder trial. In the end, Trout Shue was convicted, based not on supernatural claims, but on the weight of the physical and circumstantial evidence. Yet outside the courtroom, in the streets and kitchens and churchyards of Greenbrier, the verdict was told differently. For many, it was not the jury or the doctors who had brought justice. It was Zona herself. Still, for the skeptics, there was another explanation. They suggested Mary Jane may have already suspected her daughter was abused. Perhaps she had seen bruises, overheard arguments. The dreams and visions could have been her mind's way of forcing the truth into the open, using the language her neighbors understood best, the language of the supernatural. And even for those who dismissed the ghost entirely, there was no denying that her story had moved the town to act. It had turned whispers into demands, and demands into a trial. Whether ghost or grief, Zona had found her voice, and through her mother she had been heard. For all the facts, the medical records, the sworn testimony, some things about the Greenbrier ghost simply refuse to be explained away. We can understand broken bones, we can measure bruises, we can chart the sequence of events that led to Trout Shue's arrest. But there are other details, smaller, stranger, that do not fit neatly into any courtroom record. Take the timing of the ghost's appearances. Mary Jane Heaster said they began within days of the funeral. Not weeks, not months, just days. The first time she awoke to a sudden drop in temperature, so sharp it made her teeth chatter. Her oil lamp flickered, though there was no breeze. And then the faint smell of flowers, wild roses, Zona's favorite, filled the room. She looked to the foot of her bed, and there she was. Each visit grew more intense. Zona's voice was steady, her words deliberate, as though she was fighting the weight of the grave to speak them. And there was that impossible detail, the exact location of the break in her neck, between the first and second vertebrae, information Mary Jane could not have known, but which the autopsy later confirmed. Coincidence? A lucky guess? Or something else entirely? Then there was Shue's behavior. From the moment her body was found, he refused to let anyone touch her neck. He dressed her himself, unheard of for a man in that time and place, and wrapped a stiff collar and a scarf tightly around her throat, claiming it was her favorite. At the funeral, he hovered constantly, adjusting her head and shoulders whenever someone came near. Some whispered he was hiding something. Others believed he was simply a grieving husband, unable to let go. And then came the stories from neighbors, not in official statements, not in the trial transcript, just murmured over fences, at church gatherings, on the walk home from town. They spoke of cold drafts that moved through rooms with closed doors and windows, the sound of weeping, soft but clear when no one was home, objects that shifted places overnight, a sudden scent of flowers blooming where none grew. One neighbor swore she saw Zona herself, standing at the bend in the road near the cemetery, her hands clasped before her, her gaze fixed toward the courthouse. The boy who found her body told a friend he dreamt of her for weeks afterward, always in the same place. The bottom of that narrow staircase, her eyes wide, her lips moving as though trying to speak. Of course, none of this could be proven. It was never entered into evidence. But the whispers never stopped. And then there was the matter of Trout Shue's death. 3 years into his life sentence at the West Virginia State Penitentiary, he fell ill, suddenly, inexplicably. No official cause was recorded, no autopsy performed. He was buried in an unmarked grave, alone, his name carved nowhere. To some, this was poetic justice. To others, it was unfinished business. Rumors swirled that the Heaster family carried a gift, a second sight, passed quietly through the generations. That what Mary Jane saw was not a ghost in the traditional sense, but something older, something woven into the fabric of Appalachian belief, the ability to hear the dead when they had something left to say. And then there is perhaps the most haunting detail of all. The court never struck the ghost testimony from the record. They didn't endorse it, but they didn't erase it either. It remains there, quietly preserved among the dry language of legal documents, a shadow on the page, a whisper in the archives. And in Greenbrier County, that whisper has never really faded. Visitors to Soul Chapel Cemetery still come, leaving flowers, coins, even handwritten notes at Zona's grave. Some say they feel a sudden chill as they approach, or hear faint footsteps on the gravel path when they are alone. Others insist they have seen her, just for a moment, watching from between the trees. There are no ghosts in the courtroom anymore, but in the hills of West Virginia, there is still one that walks. And if you listen closely on a windless night, when the moon is thin and the world is still, you just might hear her calling. More than a century has passed since Zona's death, yet her story still drifts through the hills of West Virginia like the winter mist. Today, if you travel along the narrow country roads of Greenbrier County, you might not even notice Soul Chapel Methodist Cemetery at first. It is a small, quiet place, set back from the road, the grass kept short by careful hands. The stones here are modest, weathered by decades of rain and snow. And near the edge, shaded by an old tree, lies the grave of Elva Zona Heaster Shue. People still come. They leave flowers, sometimes fresh, sometimes silk. Coins glint in the grass, a silent offering. Occasionally, there's a folded piece of paper tucked against the stone, its message meant only for her. Some visitors come because they love ghost stories, others because they've heard about the case in a history class or on a late-night podcast, and a few come because they feel something calling them here. Just 20 miles away, near the white steeple of Sam Black Church, a state historical marker stands by the roadside. It reads simply, "Only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer." It is not just a tale told by locals, it is officially recognized by the state of West Virginia. The courthouse where the trial was held still stands in Lewisburg, its brick walls and tall windows unchanged. Inside, it is just another small-town courthouse now. Traffic violations, property disputes. But for some, the air in that room still carries a weight. The faint echo of a voice that, according to one woman, came from beyond the grave. Over the years, the Greenbrier Ghost has stepped far beyond county lines. Her story has been told and retold in nearly every medium imaginable. In literature, she appears in scholarly journals, true crime anthologies, and collections of Appalachian folklore. The most famous book, The Man Who Wanted 7 Wives by Katie Letcher Lyle, blends historical fact with the hauntings legend, painting Trout Shue as both villain and mystery. On stage, Zona has been reborn in plays and even an opera. Zona by Jan Buttram debuted in 1998, dramatizing her short life and eerie return. A full-length musical, The Greenbrier Ghost, has been performed multiple times since 2003, bringing her voice to theater audiences. In 2023, the opera Everlasting Faint premiered in Madison, Wisconsin. Its title borrowed from the official cause of death written on Zona's certificate. Pop culture has not left her behind. Her tale appeared in a 2019 episode of Drunk History, where it reached a younger internet-savvy audience, mixing humor with the macabre truth. True crime podcasts dissect the case, paranormal YouTubers walk their viewers through the graveyard at night, and TikTok users speculate about her ghost, their videos flashing between historical photos and candlelit recreations. For paranormal tourism, the Greenbrier Ghost is a crown jewel. Folklore tours in West Virginia often save her story for last, because nothing else compares to a case where a ghost is said to have helped convict a killer. Even skeptics admit there's something about this story that refuses to fade. Why? Because it is more than a ghost story. It is the story of a young woman who, even in death, would not be silenced. Of a mother who refused to stop asking questions, and of a town that, despite skepticism, despite ridicule, was forced to listen. Zona's voice still echoes today, in books, in plays, in roadside markers, and maybe, just maybe, in the wind that rustles through the grass over her grave. And now, you've heard it all. From the quiet beginnings in the hills of West Virginia, to the cold night when a mother claimed her daughter came back from the grave, to the courtroom where the dead seemed to speak through the living, So what do you believe? Was Elva Zona Heaster Shue truly a ghost, returning with one final act of justice? Was her mother blessed or cursed with the gift of seeing what others could not? Or was it something else, a mother's instinct so strong that she wrapped it in the only language her neighbors would understand, the language of the supernatural? Did a spirit really solve a murder? Or was this the power of belief itself, pushing a community to act when logic and law would have left the truth buried? No matter how you answer, the facts remain. Zona was murdered. Her husband was convicted, and a ghost was part of the story that brought him down. It is a tale that blurs the lines between folklore and legal record, between Appalachian superstition and cold written testimony, and over 125 years later, we are still telling it, still debating it, still feeling that small, inexplicable shiver when we hear her name. So I ask you again, what do you believe? Do you think Zona's ghost was real? Have you ever known a story, something passed in whispers, that made you question everything you thought you understood about life and death? If you have, you know that feeling. The one that lingers long after the story ends, the one that makes you glance over your shoulder on a quiet night. Because sometimes, the past doesn't stay in the past. Sometimes, history refuses to stay buried. If you enjoyed this journey into the vault, leave your thoughts below, share your own stories, and subscribe, because there are more tales waiting in the dark, and we'll be here to bring them into the light.